for Wednesday, August 17th, 2022. This meeting is hybrid. There will be attendees on the phone and online as well as here in person. So with that, let us begin. First item we have on the agenda is a request for an amended order of conditions for 17 Indigo Lane, map 80, parcel D112, SE 32-2471 for the addition of a screened porch to an approved single-family dwelling. Do we have a proponent here tonight? Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Ken Tomasian. I'm the builder and the owner. Yeah.
Hey, Ken.
Do you have anything you want to add to that description that the chairman just read?
No, I think that's sufficient. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a dwelling that's under construction then?
Correct.
Okay. And the original plans did not include this addition that you're requesting tonight?
That's right. The original plans that were approved were for a 1,516 square foot house.
Mm-hmm.
I reduced the size of the house to 864 square feet. So even with the additional 144 square feet, we're still much less than the approved square footage
Okay. All right.
for the
Good.
footprint.
Yep, good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Amy, do you have comments on this?
Sure, and actually, when we were talking out in front of my office, I didn't realize that it was so much smaller, so that's why I kept talking about mitigation.
Yeah.
I'm not recommending any mitigation for Mr. Tomasian because he's drastic, the square footage of the house is, even with the addition of the screen porch, is drastically less than what we approved. So, the house is in the same, the 800-something square foot house is in the same footprint of what would have been the larger 1,500 square foot, so he didn't change really where anything was, just made it smaller, a smaller box.
Mm-hmm.
So, we actually brought some of them to the site today to take a look at it. The site looks good, the erosion controls are working well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really just an amended order to make this the new plan of record. To refresh the commission's mind, this was a vacant lot, and the commission determined that what was being done to that lot with a small house, fairly small limit of work up close to the street wasn't gonna have an adverse impact to the wetland, which is farther away. It's the upper reaches of the Herring River. So the commission allowed Mr. Tomasian to pay the in lieu fees for mitigation in a rare circumstance. I think we've done it maybe like once or twice other times.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. So.
Appreciate it.
Yep. You kind of have to prove that you're not having an impact and minimize to the extent that you can, and you've minimized even more. So, that being said, the proposed porch would be 77.7 feet from the wetland, not the river, but the bordering vegetated wetland around it. It's completely within the limit of work. It's within the project area that was originally approved. So I'd recommend approval of the amendment with the condition that roof runoff from the porch, as well as the house already has to, go into gutters, downspouts, and dry wells, and keeping the condition that we already have on the project about no fertilizers or chemicals within the buffer zone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Comments from commissioners? Wayne, do you want to start?
No, it's pretty simple. No comment.
No comment, Ernie.
Mark?
No remarks. None.
John? Stan, any questions? We're being really easy on you tonight, I guess. I have no comments either. It looks pretty straightforward, and so we saw 2 footings for the porch. I assume there's a third one that's under
There is. I
sand or
actually
something.
uncovered it today.
Yeah, okay. All right, good. With that, can we have a motion, please?
Sure. I'll move that we approve the amended order of conditions for 17 Indigo Lane, map 80, parcel D112.SE 32-2471.
Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We're good. Thank you very much for coming
Thank you all very
tonight.
much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, Ken.
Next item on the agenda, another amended order of conditions for 2261 Head of Bay Road, map 119, parcel N5.SE 32-2425, addition of a stone patio to an approved renovation plan.
Good evening.
Evening.
David Little from Ryder and Wilcox.
And Katrine Higgins from Wilkinson Ecological Design.
And I noticed that Kathy Green, the applicant, is on Zoom, as well as Dave Hawk, the landscape architect that did the landscape plan.
Good.
So what Kathy would like to do, if you had an opportunity to get to the site, she has an area between the deck and the existing dwelling that she'd like to install a pervious patio. This, we've been careful to keep the work outside of the 50-foot buffer, but we would like to, it does occur within the 50 to 60, but what we would like to do is connect the deck, a small patio over to a slider on the L of her house, and then have a couple of steppers that go to the driveway. And then we would like to relocate previously approved steps that provided access to get under the deck to her basement over to the end of the stone wall. So, and then finally, we would like to replace the existing fence in its same location. So that is the proposed activity, and then Dave Hawk's landscape plan provides more detail to it. And then I'm hopeful that the mitigation that Wilkinson Ecological has provided would be sufficient to mitigate for this work within the 50 to 100 foot buffer. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Our plan, we provided a restoration plan and a land management plan. And you'll see that we're describing invasive plant removal, lawn removal, and native plant restoration in both documents. And this is, as what David described, this is in an effort to offset the proposed patio and also to improve the habitat available for wildlife. So just to take you through, it's a fairly, our work is fairly straightforward and typical to a lot of other projects we've done in Harwich. Currently, the project area has a mix of native and non-native species. On the one hand, there's invasive and non-native species like multiflora rose, autumn olive, bittersweet, and knotweed even popping up in the northern area of the property. And then, on the other hand, there's native species like bayberry, beech plum, some nice trees, oaks, cedars, pitch pines, clethra, and even some hay-scented fern, which is nice to see. And you may have seen, if you were out there in the northern area, there's one big, right along the property line. We've called it out as existing native shrubs and ferns, and that was, I imagine that was a previous mitigation area. So we would just be removing any invasives in that area, and all those native plants would remain. So we're proposing to remove the non-native and invasive species. We would like to, then we'd come in and seed immediately to allow that area, the entire area, to be remain intact and erosion-free. And we are proposing along the northern property line 200 square feet of lawn removal in addition to the 2,400 square feet of invasive plant management. And then we would be replanting according to the plan. So you'll see we're proposing to plant 1 oak and 1 pitch pine. As identified on our plan, there is 1 dead pitch pine that we would like to ask to be removed, as well as a pitch pine on the northern property line that's severely infested with turpentine beetle. So we'd like to remove those and replant 1 oak and 1 pitch pine in replace of those. And about 40 shrubs. You'll see we've specified arrowwood, black chokeberry, Carolina rose, and sweet fern. And then many different herbaceous species, really to focus on helping pollinators with a lot of flowering, a lot of different flowering species that will flower from the early spring to the fall. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good, thank you very much. Amy, do you have comments?
Just real quick, the project would result in an additional 300 square feet of hardscape in the 50 to 100 foot buffer. And that's what the rotten removal and the invasive removal and replanting is for. The bank is a mix of natives and invasives, so it's not kind of a wholesale removal. It's selective removals and replanting. Really don't have too much to add. I'm recommending approval of the project. It's nice to see a couple of trees going back in.
Yep.
I'm sure the commission would appreciate that. The site is pretty well vegetated to begin with. So on the planting plan, you'll see that they are also asking to do, or wishing to do invasive management on the neighboring property.
Right, yep.
Just a little bit of it. When we were on the site, we noticed, why would we stop right at the property line when you have a little bit on the next property extending to like where the staircase is on the next property? And if we can just get that, then it's less of a chance of it spreading back onto this property. So what we can handle it, this is if you would let me handle that administratively. And then, yeah, I mean, I would be comfortable. It's a small area. They would do the same work that they're doing on this property, on that one, obviously with permission of that owner. So, I would recommend approval of the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Comments from commissioners? Wayne?
I have nothing.
Al?
Very simple.
Jim?
No comments.
Nothing good.
Brad?
Yeah, just to comment on, I guess, the selective mitigation for invasives. When you have invasives and natives, I really don't favor that as mitigation for hardscape in the buffer zone. So I just want to make that point, wanting for the other commissioners to understand that's how I feel about that. I felt that way for a long time. In this case, there is some lawn being given up. What's the square footage in the lawn?
200 square feet.
200 square footage, so I think 200 square feet of lawn plus the plantings that'll go in are probably adequate. But in general, I don't favor that approach. To me, it's kind of a preferential landscaping approach to pull out invasives. So, just that one comment.
Okay, thanks, Brad. John?
Just a question. I was out at the site today, looking on the south side of the deck on the revetment there. I saw what I thought was Carolina rose. Is there Carolina, it's just a question, is there Carolina rose there mixed in with the
There may be.
other plantings there?
We did our, as you can see from our photos, we were there when things weren't, but if there, likely there might be, and we would leave, that would remain.
Okay.
It's a good thing if it's there already.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Nothing more.
Good, thanks, John. My only question, Cape Cod Meadow Mix, is that like a flowering, or is it grass?
Grass, cool season and warm season grasses.
Oh.
We kind of mix them together in our shop, and I don't think you can purchase it, but
It's your own
kind of
proprietary.
created it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good, I hadn't seen it before, so I appreciate that.
And one thing just to mention that we had with email conversation with Kathy, she does want, before we remove that maple along the property line, she just wants to run it by her neighbor because it does have nice screening, so we haven't talked to the neighbor about doing that, so I just wanted to let you know. Yeah.
Good. Any other comments? We have a motion on this then?
Sure. I'll move that we approve the amended order of conditions for 2261 Head of the Bay Road, map 119, parcel N5.SE32-2425.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda, we have a notice of intent for 14 Mill Point Road, map 1, parcel J1-94, for a proposed pier, ramp, float, and dredging. Do we have a proponent?
Yes, this is Todd Turcott from Coastal.
It's not.
Don Monroe, unfortunately, wasn't able to make
You're-
it either.
Don, you're a little hard to hear. Can you turn up your volume, please?
Let me try. Sorry, having some technical difficulties. Is that better?
That much better, yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I apologize, Don Monroe is still on the Well Fleet Commission. He was gonna present tonight, but I'm filling in for him because he's still on the other hearing. So tonight is a supplemental submission for the dock float and pier for Dr. Anino. We have been in front of you a couple of times at this point, and at the last hearing, we had proposed a mitigation and restoration of the salt marsh and the coastal bank, and Lindsay Stroh will be talking about that in detail, but you'll see in the plans and the sketches that were provided, there is a substantial proposed salt marsh restoration or mitigation of about 1,400 square feet. And then there's also over 4,000 square feet of coastal bank that is being restored, brought back to a coastal bank habitat. So there is quite a bit of restoration and mitigation associated with this project now, in addition to the anoxic mud being removed as part of the dredging that's required by adding in the salt marsh, and Michelle will talk about the shellfish mitigation also that we are proposing. So with that, unless there's questions from the commission, I'd like to turn it over to Lindsay, which I believe is on, to talk about the mitigation itself. Michelle, is Lindsay on?
He's here in person, I think.
In the flesh.
Yes, I believe he's there in person.
Good evening, again, Lindsay Strode, Cape Organics for the Aninos. As you're aware, you've probably been out to the site. It's a conventionally managed site. There's a significant slope to the river. The whole property is within the 200-foot riparian, and a good portion of it is still within the 100-foot. Our goal is to really get rid of the lawn that's on that slope. And in doing so, depending on the time of year, we'll either use a soap fatty acid to burn down the lawn and then take it out. Or we will just, depending again on the time of year, probably use a sod cutter and remove the lawn itself. There's going to be a significant amount of herbaceous material, both in seed and live plugs on the face of the slope, to manage any kind of impact that currently has and that would have in the future. Thinking about what you have at the toe, there were, I guess, at some point, some timbers that were there. Those were taken out. There's a small escarpment that will get regraded and restored to high marsh habitat. And then there's an overgrown raised bed area to the north that will also get removed and revegetated in its entirety. Shrub material is planned, as are a significant amount of transitional plants in the area. Access steps will be coming off the lawn to where it's necessary to pick up the dock to the pier. Be significant monitoring and maintenance and subsequent reporting. We will be using some erosion control mat to hold things together. I don't foresee it being a problem. We've stabilized much steeper slopes than this. So that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any other comments as far as the presentation? All right, I'll turn it over to Amy then.
I'm sorry, this is Michelle, just to jump in quickly. As Todd had mentioned, our client, we had just sent an email earlier this evening, but our client is proposing $2,500 for shellfish mitigation as well for seeding, as to be seeded by the shellfish constable in the areas that are deemed appropriate. So I just wanted to have that on record as well.
All right, thank you very much. Amy?
Thank you. I did see your email just prior to the meeting, and if you hadn't mentioned it, I was going to mention it so the commission was aware of that additional component. Since the last meeting, the Aninos have worked diligently to answer some of the questions and concerns the commission had. A week or two ago, I met with Lindsay Strode on the site to review a replanting plan, and the efforts to remove the lawn here, haven't gone unnoticed. What you've selected with the aninos is appropriate for the site in terms of kind of a shrub and layers, on the sides, and then, of course, to preserve view, but also to naturalize more of a lower growth in the center. For me, I think the most important part, it's all important, but the most important part is the regrading that Lindsay was talking about. That's at the toe of the slope, because right now there is a bit of a lip and a drop, and he would even that out and then plant a high marsh species. And this also will allow for potential marsh migration a little bit. You do have a steeper slope as you go up, which will eventually prevent that, but right now you have there's an inhibition in that cut that would inhibit marsh from migrating if it wanted to from more of a wetter lower marsh to an upper marsh, and this would make a more gradual transition to that. So the commission at the last time and myself, we talked about a couple of different things that the commission was concerned with. One was potential adverse impact or to salt marsh, and then also to shellfish habitat and land under the ocean. So for salt marsh, what I will say is, according to the plan that was provided, this is a plan from Coastal Engineering with your planting plan on it. And they went through in the notes and talked about all the different impacts to the different areas. So when you look at potential salt marsh impact, instead of just doing the posts, which we've had discussion about before as impact to salt marsh, they did include the 168 square feet, which is the square footage of the structure that is above the marsh. So that would also take into account the potential for any shading and adverse impact there. So that square footage is encompassing of that. When you look at 168 square feet of that marsh and compare it to the 1,578 square feet of high marsh that will be recreated, I do see a net benefit to salt marsh in that, for salt marsh. Let me see. And then the component that I have gone back and forth on quite a bit is how to equate mitigation on an upper slope, the 0 to 50 foot buffer, with impacts to the land containing shellfish and land under the ocean. So as we've said before, they do need, in order to get to their 2.5 feet of depth that we would require. This was filed prior to the town meeting when it was required, 3 feet was required. So this was filed before that with us. But they would have to dredge in order to do that. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the Shellfish Survey. I will just say that of several different types of shellfish, quahog, soft shells, oysters, horseshoe crabs, were found when the survey was done. So, unfortunately, I cannot recommend approval for the work under land under the ocean and land containing shellfish, even with all the wonderful things that you're proposing to do to the buffer zone. Our regulations don't say that you can improve a buffer zone or habitat, which you are proposing to do, in offset of changing a completely different resource area, at least not how I read it. So it's not something it's not a recommendation I came by lightly, but I cannot recommend approval under the Wetlands Act or the bylaw for land under the ocean and land containing shellfish.
All right, thank you very much. Comments from the commissioners. Wayne, would you like to start this?
I really don't have much of a problem with this.
Alan?
I'm still trying to digest some of the information that was handed to us from their lawyers. And on page 3 there, it says, the commission approved in recent years similar proposed projects to what they're proposing. And they listed 4 of them. I just gotta do some more thinking and understand.
Okay. Jim?
Basically, on my first review of this, I think I'm in agreement with Amy's recommendations.
Mark?
With respect to Amy's recommendation, I understand exactly what she means, but to me, I think there's a broader sense of benefit, and I would support it.
Okay. Brad?
Yeah, really nothing new. I mean, we've had multiple hearings. You know, my interpretation of our bylaws on shellfish, as well as the water depth, make this project very hard to support for those 2 reasons. You know, you can't get the water depth you need presently without dredging, and you dredge habitat that contains soft shell clams, quahogs, oysters. So it's really got 2 issues in the way, and I do appreciate all the work done for salt marsh mitigation. That's a fair amount, but again, we're mitigating for impacts, and my preference is always to avoid any impacts such as that. So no changes really for me on this one.
All right. John?
Yeah, I support Amy's recommendation and her comments, all of her comments. I do have a question related to what Alan said, which is in the document from Michelle, like Alan pointed out, you're listing 4 projects, but one of those projects is at 14 Mill Point Road. So I'm confused about what that is. Is that some previous project, or are you including the project we're talking about as if we already approved it? I don't know what that is. Please explain.
If I could just jump in, I wasn't referring to the 14 Mill Point as an approved project. I was just laying out the bullet points of what was proposed currently for Nino, so it was clear to make it easier for the commission to compare what is proposed to the other projects that I listed. So it is the current project.
That's very unclear in the document, but okay. I have nothing more.
If I could follow up on that comment in response to Alan's comment, I think the projects listed are quite different in the sense they don't have that need to dredge, to hit that depth, and to dredge where soft shell clams, oysters, and quahogs were demonstrated to be present in moderate to high densities. So it is a different project in that regard.
Stan, do you have any comments or questions?
Actually, I agree with Amy and the points that Brad made, and especially this last one. I don't remember any of these having any dredging involved.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, our council has advised us repeatedly that positions taken on prior projects have no relevance, no precedent. Each one is a standalone project, and any decisions we make in the past certainly have no implications to decisions we make tonight, nor vice versa. So it's nice to provide that information to us. We've seen this multiple times in prior dock applications, but unfortunately, I would recommend to the commissioners that they're really irrelevant to the determinations we have to make tonight. There's a couple of other concerns that I had. I mean, you make mention in the opinion that was submitted, legal opinion, that the project will have no adverse impact or effect on the salt marsh, but yet you go on to say that will be pilings that will be located in the salt marsh. So I think that's sort of conflicting information that's included in the opinion here. There's also some conclusions that the majority of docks on the Herring River have not had any adverse effect on salt marsh. But the study certainly the tour that we took with the harbor master a number of months ago, and the pictures that we have on file indicate that there's, certainly on some of the older ones, significant impact that we've seen underneath the docks. So I would also suggest that that statement is not necessarily appropriate for our considerations either. And then with respect to the plan that's before us, again, it does show dredging. I think I've mentioned at all the prior hearings that I am not a proponent of dredging, certainly not improvement dredging. Maintenance dredging, I have a different opinion on, but I think in any situation, especially in a river situation like this with the tidal flows and the currents that we have, the dredging that would be done, and the prior plans that we have show that it is in an area of anoxic mud that stretches both up and down river from this. I think in a short period of time, that dredging would be potentially degraded by the anoxic mud that exists on both sides of it. So I'm less in favor of this plan with respect to the dredging proponent of it. The other thing, I just want to go back a little bit to the last meeting. And at that meeting, in preparation for it, we were given a number of papers that talked about eutrophication, anoxic mud, and the effect of nitrogen on our tidal areas. And I complimented the applicant for the studies that he had presented to us and the research that he did on this. And I was really pleased with his reaction. He said he appeared to be a convert, I think, from Old Mill Point. If you go into that development, you know that every lawn in there looks like the 18th hole on a golf course. And he seemed to be very supportive of the intent and the objective that we've had in the past of trying to mitigate fertilizers in particular and the impact, the negative impact that they have on our ecosystems. And I was really impressed at that hearing by the, number one, the information he provided to us and his response to our concerns over fertilizer. This week, our conservation administrator was out at the property, taking a look at the project again. And as she was standing there, the landscape truck pulled up, they unloaded the spreaders, and they started putting fertilizer on the lawn, which was pretty disappointing to hear. And I don't know if that is, how we should react to that. Either the representations that we were given at the last meeting were insincere, or the concerns that we were given from the proponent just were that. I mean, they didn't appear to be sincere from the perception that Amy got this week. So that was disappointing. And, in light of that, in light of the impact on shellfish habitat that we have here, bear in mind that essentially they're asking for that we waive the requirement that you can't build in a shellfish environment. And generally, in order for us to grant a waiver, we would have to have some evidence of hardship. So take that in consideration in your deliberations tonight, please. Whether or not you feel there is a hardship here that justifies a waiver from our requirements and under our rules. And if you feel there is, then fine. If not, then be judged accordingly. Any other comments?
I would just want to say that, in my opinion, the observations of the fertilizer is concerning. it's a widespread concern. It should be somewhat viewed independently of this notice of intent.
Okay. Any other comments from the proponents?
Yeah, through the chair, it's Don Monroe. Ernie, would I have a chance to just speak on a couple of points?
Certainly.
So I listened, and I have all the respect in the world for the commission and their deliberations. So if I sound out of line, please let me know, because I don't want to be out of line. But I do find it interesting that on the one hand, you indicated to us that we can't use other projects to demonstrate a similarity, and yet I hear from the chair the use of existing docks that are not designed to the standards of your regulations, and then saying that those are evidence that this dock would, or the implication that this dock would have an adverse effect on the salt marsh, when in fact, the commission has in the past approved pile-supported structures in the salt marsh based on today's standards of design. So I would really appreciate that if we as applicants aren't supposed to use previous projects to indicate precedent, then I would say that the same thing has to be done through the commission, that to make a statement that this design is going to act like those older docks, and you, the chair, with respect, said the older docks. We don't dispute that the older docks with the older design have an effect on the salt marsh, but we just don't agree that this design that's used in many other locations, in many other spots on the Cape, do not demonstrate that they have an adverse effect on the salt marsh. Second, I find it interesting that in restoring two completely different resource areas. Number one, the salt marsh, we're restoring that. Number two, a coastal bank. And then I hear that you're concerned about the nitrogen loading, and yet you're denying the possibility of eliminating almost entirely any nitrogen from this property, because there'll be a buffer strip, a coastal bank community that uptakes nitrogen, as well as a restoration of salt marsh. So I listen to all of you, give your discussions, and I try to be as fair-minded as I can, but I'm having a difficult time with the disparity between some of the statements that are being made. And I just want to be on record that we as applicants disagree with a lot of what's just been said. So thank you for the time.
Let me address your comments, Don.
Sure.
When I made the statement that some of the existing docks on the Herring River have had adverse effect on the salt marsh, it was referring specifically to the statement that was in the legal opinion. I did not in any way imply that it was anywhere would correlate to this particular proposal.
Okay.
The second thing was with respect to concern on nitrogen loading. Again, I didn't imply that this particular project would have either a positive or negative impact on nitrogen loading. What I was stating was that the proponent, when he came to us at the last hearing, indicated to us that he was fully aware of the negative impacts that nitrogen has as far as fertilizer applications. And yet today, or this week, he was putting fertilizer on his lawn.
Point well taken. I think I was referring to someone else on the commission that was making a statement that they have concern about nitrogen along the whole river, and that this project, as it's proposed, not the use of nitrogen. I understand that there may be some issues going on with nitrogen being placed on the lawn currently, but the proposal in front of you has nothing to do with that. The proposal in front of you has to do with a restoration of two resource areas that you're saying is not enough mitigation for one other resource area, two other resource areas. And I believe that the Aninos are willing to put $2,500 per year towards shellfish mitigation for the anoxic mud that is not producing the shellfish that others might have us believe is producing. So, and I'm not a shellfish expert, but we have done so many dredge projects in Harwich, yes, not for docks that don't meet the standard for the depth, but for crying out loud, the whole Allen Harbor was dredged, and that shellfish habitat is now doing much better than it ever has done. So to be against dredging may not be the right approach, because that's going to remove the anoxic mud and the ions that bond to that anoxic mud that are related to nitrogen. So it's like we're trying to do something that we think is positive, but I don't hear the commission saying anything about the positive nature of the application. I just hear that docks shouldn't be allowed. That's kind of what the bottom line is, and it's like, but why? Give us some solid reasons why. That's what I'm asking for, not talking to the legal opinion about this or the nitrogen because someone's putting it down on their lawn now. That is just flying in the face to the very thing you're telling us not to do, which is don't bring other projects to us that are similar and expect us to treat them or treat this one like we treated those. Well, okay, that's fine, we won't, but what gives? I think it's a fair question.
Stan?
I'd just like to make a comment. A lot of these comments are related to nitrogen and salt marsh, neither of which were being focused on as part of the denial.
Thank you.
Well, wait a minute. Did you just say part of this denial? Has there been a vote on this yet? That's not fair.
Excuse me, the recommendation.
Yeah, but I think you just told the tale, Stan.
If I could just jump in,
Totally unfair.
through the chair, may I have an opportunity to speak?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Michelle Hunton on behalf of Dr. Nino. First, I wanted to address, Mr. Chase, your comment in my letter where you said that I stated there was no adverse impact to salt marsh. I did state that, there may be an impact because of the 3 monopiles in the salt marsh, but there is no adverse impact to the salt marsh because the dock was designed in a way to meet the newest bylaw requirements that was just approved at town meeting, the higher the width requirements, the higher height, the deck spacing. It complies with all of that. And in addition, although the mitigation requirement is 4-to-1, and the mitigation here that is proposed is 27-to-1, so it far exceeds that. So based on all of this, I don't understand a situation where the commission, it seems that the commission would, going forward, deny every single proposed dock over salt marsh because we're meeting the regulations that we weren't even required to meet at the time we filed it. We're proposing well beyond the required amount of mitigation. There's only 3 monopiles in the salt marsh. And again, you don't like to bring up, I understand you don't want to bring up prior projects, but you recently approved the Ellis project spanned even further over salt marsh, and their mitigation was much less than this. So there's really no reasonable basis to what you're stating, because basically, to me, it's a blanket statement that you would deny any dock over salt marsh, because I don't see any proposed dock over salt marsh, including a view of mitigation that would be better to the environment than what is proposed here. And also in terms of the mitigation requirement, I did look at the bylaw, and it doesn't tie the mitigation, at least from my view of it. It's kind of worded vaguely, and it doesn't tie the mitigation to any specific resource area. So I view that this proposed mitigation could cover any concerns for mitigation related to land containing shellfish and land under the ocean. And in addition, as we stated, we proposed shellfish mitigation as well in the terms of the $2,500, and we can talk about that number and how it can be used, but there is proposed shellfish mitigation. So to say that there's nothing is not correct. We've proposed that all along at the prior hearings as well. We've discussed that. Also, in terms of the comments regarding dredging, as we've stated, the area of dredging is anoxic mud, and the purpose of the dredging is to meet the depth requirement. Again, I know that I think Mr. Chase, you had stated you haven't approved dredging, or you don't like to approve dredging, but the fact is, again, the commission approved dredging before, most recently with the Eben project. Square footage of that dredging was about 140 cubic yards, and here it's less than 100, so it's a smaller amount of dredging. It was similar, it was in an area of anoxic mud, so we don't see the concern with it here. Also, earlier this summer, we approved one of Mark Burgess's projects at Oyster Creek, and there were some studies done to show that 2 years after dredging was done, any shellfish populations came back to what was initially there. And again, here, as we stated, the dredging area is in an area of anoxic mud, which is not good shellfish habitat. And other projects do matter, because I know that, as stated, you don't like to consider it, but courts will consider it because it could be considered arbitrary and capricious if proving lots of other projects and all of a sudden, you know, there's no valid reason or valid basis for denying a project that is even more beneficial to the environment, has more mitigation proposed, and has less impacts. Also, I just wanted to mention that in the past, with these newer dock designs, again, they're meeting all of the new proposed standards, so we don't understand why the commission was so intent in having, in changing the bylaw and making more stringent standards, and now a project comes in that complies with all of those standards, and it's being denied just because. So from a legal perspective, it wouldn't withstand a challenge in court because we are meeting all of the standards of the bylaw. And then again, in terms of the shellfish variance, I just wanted to point out, and Pam Newberg can jump into this a little further, that Heinz Croft submitted a letter to the commission on April 21st saying that even though the Herring River is considered a shellfishing area, he's not opposed to the project as proposed. So he is not concerned as long as the applicant is willing to provide shellfish mitigation, which the applicant, as stated, is willing to provide that. Also, in terms of the shellfish, I don't know if Pam, if you want to jump in at all, but I think that's all I have to say for now.
Other comments?
Yes, through the chair. Donna Nino, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so tonight I heard one of the commissioners mentioning that the Shellfish Survey showed a moderate to high shellfish count. I'm not aware what that is. And also the surveys, none of them showed a high count that I'm aware of, or moderate. But I heard that was one of the reasons someone was against it.
Amy, I think that was your comment at the.
It might have been mine, but I didn't hear a question.
I didn't say high or moderate. All I said there was a
I think it was
variety
Brad.
of shellfish
I think it
found.
was
I think it was Mr. Chase that said a high to moderate.
Right.
Sorry, moderate to high shellfish count. So I don't know what that is or what that means. And none of the three surveys that I'm aware of showed that. So I'm just curious as to where that comes from.
I'll let John's gonna
John?
say it.
Yeah, well, I can't say what a moderate or high shellfish count is either, but I will point out.
I got the camera and I got the audio on my phone. It's gonna be a while.
I'm sorry, we have one of the commissioners is,
That's one.
would you mute your phones online, please?
One on the commission was,
I know, what are you talking about the last one?
well, they have a. Yes, I believe that was. They have a list of all.
All
Yeah,
right.
I was just gonna point out, these shellfish surveys, and I believe the ones that Dr. Newbert has done, are basically sampling 1% of the survey area. So when you see a count of shellfish, and I don't remember what the number is here, it seems like a modest number, but from a statistical point of view, the most likely interpretation of that is that there's 100 times more shellfish in the survey area than was found in the sample area. So even though it's whatever the number is, 20 or 25 or 30 shellfish, there's a lot more shellfish there because you've only sampled a very small percentage of the survey area.
And sorry, we had to mute somebody who was online because we were getting some back and forth background noise, but if you were online and wanted to say something, let us know.
Stan?
I'd like to add to John's comment.
Hi, this is Pam Newberg here. I'm here. I was having some trouble with moving from mute and to be able to speak and then turning mute back on.
Yeah.
But now I think I have the system.
All right, Pam,
out.
thank you. We have a comment from one of the commissioners.
Sure.
I was just trying to add to John's comment, because if I remember the survey specifically, half of the grids were in the Marsh area, which in effect were not even being sampled. So out of the normal grid, it was only about half of the grid was measuring.
No, that's.
Can I finish my comment, please?
Yes, okay. I would like the opportunity to speak after, please. Thank you. To the chair.
Go ahead, Stan.
So that was my that was my recollection of that survey. So really, out of a normal pattern, it was really only about half of the grids were really being sampled, and the rest were in the Marsh area.
All right. Yes, Pam, did you have a comment you would like to make?
I just want to make sure that it's clear about how the survey is conducted. So we start at the high marsh area and we go out to 20 feet beyond the seaward-most extent of the pier. So that would be where the vessel would be placed adjacent to the dock. And then we set up our samples every 10 feet to the point at which we are 20 feet beyond the seaward. So if the pier goes out 80 feet, we go out to 100 feet. And we set up our samples along a center line every 10 feet. And then we set up linear transects that are spaced out to 50 feet on either side of the center line. And then we set up transects that are 10 feet apart, perpendicular and parallel to the pier, out to 50 feet on either side. Our surveys are done in a systematic way so that they are scientifically repeatable. And we provide shellfish assessment more than any other consultant that you would hire. Our surveys are much more comprehensive to understand the shellfish habitat in the area, not just the area where the center line would be, but the whole footprint. So it's not half of the samples were in the salt marsh. Only a small percentage of the samples were in the marsh. And we do not dig up marsh purposefully to find shellfish. We understand that that's important habitat and we don't destroy it just to find shellfish. A large number of our samples were out in the water, in the river, and we did not find many shellfish at the samples where we were taking in the footprint of our sample area. So I think it's a mistake to think that naturally, if you found 5 shellfish, you need to multiply that by 100 or whatever that number is. There's not, just because you find 5 shellfish in an area doesn't mean that you automatically scale up by 100 or 5 or 10, or it's a representation of what is found in the area at 10-foot intervals across a large area. There could be no shellfish at all besides the shellfish that we found. There may be more, but if there was a lot of shellfish present, then we would have found shellfish in the samples as we move further offshore into the deeper water, which we didn't find, because as you move into the deeper water, the sediment becomes black and an oxic because it's in the middle of the river as a consequence of eutrophication, and it becomes habitat that's not optimal for shellfish. So I just want to caution the town to think about the large area that's being sampled to understand what the shellfish is over this footprint, and not just to make the assumption that you can multiply upscale and get a total number, because that's not factual.
Thank you very much. John?
I have a question for Dr. Newbert, which is, do you have a model that you use that will give you a total number of shellfish in the survey area, given what you find in the 1 square foot sample plots that you use within a 100 square foot survey area? Is there a model?
There's no hypothetical or theoretical model that we use. We report on the shellfish that we find. And when we go to areas that have high shellfish densities, whether it's for soft shells in the intertidal and shallow subtidal, or if it's cohogs, then we would find cohogs at every sample we would take, or near every sample that we would take, if there was a high density. If there's a low density, then we find only a few cohogs here and there, and across the larger footprint. That's why we look at a larger footprint. If we only looked at the center line, where we were thinking about putting the pier, then we might not find any shellfish at all. And that wouldn't be very helpful for you for making decisions. So we look at a large footprint. Part of that footprint won't even be touched by this project. But in order for us to give you an estimate of how many shellfish or shellfish abundance in this area, we look at a large area, because we know that if we only looked at the small area of the footprint of the proposed project, then that might be biased. So we're trying to eliminate the bias of looking in a small footprint area, which a lot of other shellfish consultants take that small footprint approach and say, oh, there's no shellfish here, because we looked in the center line and we looked where the float will go. They don't go 20 feet beyond where the float will go to look at the berthing area of where the boat will be placed. We're trying to help the town understand where the shellfish might be and where we can better place. There's been multiple surveys here for Dr. Anino. We've moved the pier location. Dawn, Monroe, and Coastal Engineering have worked with the town and listened to you and heard you, and have put in mitigation and planning in place to help site this pier in a place where there isn't shellfish. We just happen to do our shellfish survey in a large footprint so that you can understand whether there's a high abundance or a low abundance in the area that we sample. So I don't have a specific model that I can use, because it's different for every single place we go. There's a difference, and that model wouldn't be applicable to whether I do it in Harwich in the Herring River, or I do it in an open ocean environment. It's different. So you need to take, and that's why I think the town has a requirement for doing a shellfish survey to help with the permitting process.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to ask a question for my own clarification, and this can be to any members of the commission or to Amy. It appears as if Amy's recommendations for denial are based on the impact on shellfish in the area. They are proposing mitigation for the shellfish for a certain dollar amount per year. What I am trying to understand, and I don't have the knowledge to understand it, is whether that amount of mitigation would be sufficient to mitigate the proposed impact by this project?
I'll let Amy respond to that, because she's dealt with these situations probably more than any of us have.
So shellfish mitigation in general should be used really when a project has minimal, a project standing alone has minimal impact on shellfish habitat. And it would be allowable with mitigation. So the typical mitigation amounts that we have required, which is when we deem a project to be acceptable and not have adverse impact, is 30 bushels of a mixed class of shellfish per year for 3 years, which amounts to, Heinz Proft, our shellfish constable, calculated it out. I'm sure with inflation is actually, would technically be more money, but it's about $2,000 a year or $6,000 for the 3 years. And the people, the applicants who receive a permit can either elect to have somebody, either themselves do it or somebody on their behalf do the work, or because we get greater compliance this way, the town has a shellfish fund dedicated, mitigation fund dedicated for this, that only Heinz and myself can use specifically to reseed, to buy seed for to reseed areas. Just as a note, that shellfish reseeding, regardless of who does it, it wouldn't be all done on this property. You would overload things. So, but it stays within the water body, so it would have to be in the Herring River system.
And recollect, because I didn't see the email that you mentioned just came in. What are they proposing?
Yep, $2,500.
For all 3 years?
It just says Mr. Anino is willing to contribute $2,500 to fund shellfish seed.
All right, thank
Per
you.
year, through the chair, per year.
Yeah.
He said
Yeah.
per year.
I mean, my understanding was that when they were doing the presentation, they said per year, and they were willing to talk to the town as to whether or not that was sufficient.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, Brad?
Yeah, just to add, so we have a bylaw that says there's no new water-dependent structures in shellfish areas. It has been demonstrated by the survey, the shellfish are there. It's a mapped shellfish area. And so the trouble I have is overcoming the need to give a variance to that bylaw provision. And so to me, you're trading habitat, shellfish habitat impacts for 3 years of seed. And for me, that's not enough to satisfy a variance request for this type of a project. The number's been given out, we've had it before, and we've given those variances at times. And to me, after 3 years, what happens? It impacts the habitats continue, and the seed is gone. So I haven't supported that approach. And the second issue, we do have a second variance here, because the existing condition right now is you don't have the 2.5 feet at mean low water. So to me, it doesn't matter what would happen if this was granted. Right now, you don't have that, so this needs a second variance for that reason.
If I can please respond regarding the variance issue that was raised related to shellfish. As you know that we've discussed before at prior hearings, there's not a set of performance standards in your current regulations as to how to assess whether a project is adversely impacting land-containing shellfish, because there's basically a ban for any docks and shellfish in town map shellfish areas. But as you know, the requirement to be able to have a dock or walkway project in a shellfish area is to get a variance. Standard for a variance is whether a project adversely affects the interest in the bylaws, so whether it adversely affects land-containing shellfish. And because the local bylaw and regulations do not have performance standards related to land-containing shellfish, the commission is required to review the standards in the Wetlands Protection Act regulations in 310 CMR 10.34. And in Pam Newbert's report, her March 2022 report, she goes through all of those performance standards. I'm not going to reiterate exactly what she said in the report, and opined, as a professional biologist, opined that there is no adverse impact to land containing shellfish. So just because there are shellfish located in an area and it is land containing shellfish does not mean there are adverse impacts to land containing shellfish. So in our view, the variance standard is met because Pam Newbert has opined that there's no adverse impact on land containing shellfish. And what the commission has, my understanding has viewed in the past, is really the impact on shellfish habitat, not just because there's some shellfish located there, it doesn't mean that a project is adversely impacting shellfish. It's the habitat that should be looked at. And as we stated, the dredging benefits shellfish habitat, so we see the project as a net benefit to shellfish habitat. And again, in addition, we're also proposing the shellfish mitigation, and our client is happy to work with the commission on determining the correct amount that the commission could feel comfortable with. And again, as we stated, prior projects that were approved in shellfish areas like the Fall project on Chase Street, which was a dock project approved, and a variance was issued in a land containing shellfish area. There have been follow-up studies that have shown that shellfish populations are abundant there. So, comments that, shellfish don't come back is not, in our view, accurate based on those studies.
Just a quick comment. I disagree strongly that the study you just referenced suggests that shellfish populations have rebounded strongly. The evidence is not there. I don't support that statement.
This is Pam here. To the chair, I want to remind the commission that in 310 CMR 1034, there's a provision that states that the project can have impact to shellfish as long as the shellfish can be returned to their original abundance within 1 year of completion of the construction. And with the kind of abundances or the numbers that we found at this area and the type of mitigation that's being proposed over the 3 years, and the amount of money that would buy shellfish seed, it's more, the amount of seed that will be purchased far exceeds the number of shellfish that we would find in that area, especially in the black mud that's being proposed to be removed, which could which has a high probability of being beneficial to shellfish habitat by removing that black anoxic mud. So I think that with the amount of shellfish mitigation that's being proposed, that the state's standards for land containing shellfish will be met, and that there is not an impact or an adverse effect to shellfish from this project, because the amount of mitigation is so high. And in addition to that, there's been the new proposal to convert lawn into salt marsh habitat, high salt marsh habitat that would be able to withstand sea level rise as that happens over the years. And I think that is beneficial to shellfish habitat as well. It's not direct habitat, but it's a mechanism of buffering nutrients that may come in or out of with the tide. And we all agree here that salt marsh habitat is a better natural environment than just a plain grass lawn. So I think if you combine the salt marsh habitat mitigation along with the shellfish mitigation being proposed over the 3 years, there's far more benefit in that the abundances of shellfish in the area that we surveyed, not just for the pier and where the boat will go, but over across the whole area, it will far exceed what's there currently over the next over the year, which is the performance standard in the state 1034. So, and not to forget to mention, there's a pier just to the north of where this proposed pier is going to be placed that sits on the seafloor because it's an older pier and it doesn't meet the performance standards of the town or the state. But when our survey extended over to that pier, and we found shellfish all around the pier and even underneath the pier that was sitting on the seafloor. So shellfish and piers can coexist.
Through the chair, not to beat a dead horse, I just have 2 points to make. It's Don Monroe. I just want to, it'll be very short. It's kind of in line with what Pam is talking about. First of all, first, do I have permission from the chair?
Yes, Don, go ahead.
Okay, so I really hear a total misunderstanding about dredging in everything that I listen to here. And I understand why, because there's this misnomer that dredging steals habitat, when in fact it does not. The mud that comes out does not go down to China. It only is a 6-inch layer of material that you take out, and the habitat that will be created underneath that is far more beneficial. Even if it gets silted in over time, it's still going to be better habitat. So there's no, quote, lost habitat due to the dredging in our minds. And I just want to be on record for saying that. What it comes down to is what habitat is being lost. And the only habitat that I can find that's quote being lost, which I still don't agree with, is the square footage of the piles that are taking up the seafloor. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the plan, that amounts to 4 square feet of pile surface that will go into the land under the ocean and occupy a space that a shellfish might occupy. And yet, demonstrated time and time again, and years ago in Harwich, people understood that if there was a shellfish in the way while they're driving a pile, they'd move it out of the way because it had to be done in the presence of the shellfish constable. So there wouldn't be any death to a shellfish. And the loss of habitat, to me, is minimal to the amount of gain that the dredging is going to provide by getting rid of the material that is not beneficial to shellfish. And if you look at any Army Corps study that does all kinds of studies on dredging, because the Army Corps promotes dredging, usually shellfish habitat at the very outside will recover within 1 year. And there are technical reports that support this. So I just want to be on record for that because it's important.
Alan?
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to reflect. I'm trying to come up with what I want to say. I've been on the board for almost a year now, and I've learned a lot. Things that I didn't know. I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. I rely on the experts that we have in front of us as the applicants. They bring their information. As I've sat here, I've listened, and I've taken in all of this information, and what Mr. Monroe just said, 4 square feet of impact underneath one pile, and the size of the pilings are 12-inch in diameters. The total impact area is 170 square feet. The mitigation is going to be 681 square feet. I see this as a benefit. The applicant has come here, he's hired professionals, they've looked at all these scenarios. Nobody can really judge or say what somebody does or doesn't do, how it's gonna affect something down the road. We really don't know. As my past year here, and I haven't been on some of the decisions, most recently was a decision made last week with over $2 million square feet of impact that this board approved variances from all the bylaws in the town of Harwich. And here we are talking about 170 square feet. So, and these gentlemen is trying to mitigate, he's trying to avoid the grass areas, make that a better situation so the nitrogen doesn't go into the river. I think they have proven that they are trying to follow the rules of the law and try to enhance that area. I've grown up in Harwich, I'm part of the community, I've seen Heron River. As I said, I'm not an expert, I'm not a boat person, I don't do anything. But I try to go shellfishing sometimes, and I dig and dig and dig, and I don't find a shellfish. So, whose fault is that? That's just, maybe I found the wrong spot. But it just comes down to a lot of common sense here. And I think the person has put a lot of time and effort into this, and I really don't see any negative impact at all with this. I think it will be a very nice vista view from the bridge going across Lower County Road, looking that way, and hopefully it improves the river so people can enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? All right. Let me just sort of sum up. I think what we have before us is a request for two variances. One from the shellfish requirement as far as siting a structure within a mapped shellfish area. And the second is from the 2.5-foot depth requirement by means of a request for us to allow dredging in that location. That's kind of the salt marsh. I think Amy's recommendation stated that she has no concerns with respect to the impact on salt marsh nor the mitigation that's been proposed to address that. So that's really not a concern of ours at this point in time. I think
It's not mine anyways.
yours, thank you. But I would echo that. I think that this proposal has done a very good job as far as mitigation to salt marsh areas. So I don't think that's a big concern of ours as far as this vote tonight. But that being said, if there are no other comments, Mark?
I have one thing to add. As I see the whole circumstance, given the different opinions of everyone, the benefit to the upper salt marsh versus the shellfish area. The impact to the shellfish area that seems to be the area of contention, that disruption is the cost for the benefit at the other end of the project. And I see it being a fairly small price to pay for the ultimate gain. That's all I've got to add.
All right, good, thank you. With that, can we have a motion, please?
Excuse me, do you mind if I jump in for 1 minute? I have one more question. So the applicant, we're trying, as you can see, we've tried to do a lot to see what we can do to get approval here and to try to mitigate for any potential impact and, design the project in the way that there's not impact. And it seems to me, it's my understanding that the main concerns the commission has are related to land under the ocean and land containing shellfish. And I guess we're at the point where we'd like to try to figure out a way what we can do moving forward to work with the commission to address their concerns. And I don't know if someone is able to, kind of summarize, I guess, what the adverse impact the commission sees to both of those areas so that we can attempt to, determine any maybe modifications to the project or further mitigation to address those impacts. I guess we're not really understanding what the precise impacts are to those resource areas.
I think the conversations that we've had for the last 30 minutes or so have talked about the concerns that we have. I mean, there are two variances on the table right now, and we've talked quite a bit about shellfish surveys, impacts, and that sort of a thing. We've talked about the 2.5 feet. We've talked about concerns about dredging and the dredged area being subsequently filled in. So I'm not sure what's unclear so far.
Well, one thing we wanted to potentially look at is whether if we propose additional dredging of anoxic mud, that could be a potential benefit to shellfish habitat and potentially provide more mitigation. And we think it might make sense for us to review that further.
Are you suggesting you'd like to come back to another meeting?
Yes, to look into that further to see if there's any ways we can further mitigate for your concerns for land containing shellfish. Another thing I just wanted to raise is it wasn't my understanding that a variance was required for dredging if the dredging is done to reach water depth. That I hadn't seen that in the regulations, but maybe I'm missing something there.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm a little frustrated. What's this, hearing number 4?
It's actually, so they applied previously, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle or anybody on the team, but withdrew and refiled. So we've actually, this is only, I believe, our second hearing with testimony for this current application.
Okay, so in reference to
Correct.
the last request, one thing I've asked for a few times is documentation that this is in fact a noxic sediment. To me, I've dug there a fair amount. It may be anoxic at times of year. It's certainly epoxic a number of times of the year. I hear a lot of discussion of how bad the habitat is. I haven't seen any chemical documentation that's actually anoxic. The surveys have caught quahogs in those sediments. When I dig, I see polychaetes, I see other organisms, so the thing's living there. And so to me, again, it has habitat that has function, it has shellfish, and so it would be improvement dredging, and it would need a variance for that. So I would ask the applicant, if they're gonna come back, to please provide some documentation that it is in fact anoxic as opposed to hypoxic or some other condition.
Okay, if I could just respond, we would like to request the continuance to look into further, potential revisions to address the commission's concerns, but we will potentially look into the, your request regarding anoxic mud, but just for the record, I haven't heard that request before. I don't know if Pam Newbert wants to jump in, but that wasn't made at prior hearings because we would have looked into that.
If you wish, I can document when my request was made before. It's in my notes.
Yeah, I saw it in the minutes.
How much time would you like to have?
Look, I can jump in just to say that, hypoxic or anoxic, if we're talking about shellfish habitat, whether the sediment has very low oxygen in it or it has no oxygen in it, it doesn't matter. It's not optimal shellfish habitat. Shellfish prefer or like to, you find higher abundances of shellfish in sediments that have some, that have oxygen in the sediments, that aren't black, that aren't hypoxic or anoxic. You can find shellfish in hypoxic and anoxic areas, but when they make seed in the seed set, the sediments that are in the hypoxic or anoxic areas, when the bacteria process the sulfides that are naturally occurring in the water because they use hydrogen, they make hydrogen sulfide. That sulfide the hydrogen sulfide turns the area acidic, and that is corrosive to shellfish. It's corrosive to the calcium in the shellfish shells, and it might not be necessarily able to kill a large adult quahog, but when you're talking about small seed that have very thin shells that are just setting up in the new, in the new year of their hatching, because there's the shellfish are larval, so the juveniles or the larval stage, the young shellfish are up in the water column. And then when they pick their place to settle, if they pick a place that has acidity from hydrogen sulfide, then their shells erode and you won't find juvenile shellfish. You'll find the bigger shellfish, and that's true. You can find shellfish in hypoxic and anoxic areas, but you're not finding the juvenile stages or the very young seeds that, because the sediment is not conducive to allow them to grow, because it's anoxic or hypoxic, and it becomes acidic and it corrodes their shells. If you wanted my recommendation, given that there is an area that is near where the boat would be placed, and to either side of where the dock would be placed, would be to dredge that anoxic or hypoxic mud, and then once you've removed that sediment that is not conducive to growing young juvenile quahogs, then you would be able to have a higher rate of success with the $2,500 per year for the next 3 years of the seed that you're putting in, because you've removed the sediment that is not conducive to their growth. I wouldn't just take $2,500 and put it into seed and put it in an area where the sediment is anoxic or hypoxic, because it's not an optimal kind of habitat for these young juvenile shellfish to grow and to set, because it will erode their shells and cause them stress. So you want to make sure that the habitat is suitable for these young stages of shellfish before you put them in, or you'll have no success. And that's a false way of measuring, you know, success for the applicant, to say, oh, well, the shellfish didn't survive there, so you're having impacts. You have to think about what's there for the habitat before you put the shellfish seed down. And so no matter what, I would recommend removing the sediment that doesn't have the high, or that does the anoxic or hypoxic sediment, even if it's only anoxic or hypoxic in the summertime, when that's the period of time when the water is warmer and these shellfish will have their higher growth rate. And
Pam,
because in the wintertime, they bury deep. So, I mean, I know we've talked about this a lot in the past, and I'll leave it at that. I just want to caution people here of making false assumptions and not understanding the actual biology of the shellfish itself.
Pam, thank you, and that's helpful information, but I would suggest that you might want to consider incorporating that into the recommendations you come forth with at the next meeting then.
It is in my reports. I do mention that the sediment is not optimal for shellfish growth.
Yes, I know, but as far as the dredging and that sort of a thing, it might be helpful, but we can talk about it more when you come back. I know our next meeting.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm sorry. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 7th. We have 3 weeks before the next meeting, because we've had our 2 for this month, correct?
Yeah, we would need information by the 31st of August. So the meeting after that is September 21st.
The 7th or the 21st.
Or whatever, I mean, what is your time frame? So,
This is Todd Turcott from Coastal. I would like the second meeting, the one in September, not the August 31st deadline, to get this information in a timely manner.
yep, so the meeting would be September 21st. We would need information by September 14th.
That would be fine. Thank you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Todd Turcott, through the chair, can I just maybe ask a question to expand upon what Pam was stating about additional dredging? If it is truly found we believe it is, anoxic mud or hypoxic mud, additional dredging, is that, Coastal's been involved with the town of Harwich for many years, and Allen Harbor was dredged for that reason and has improved water quality and improved other shellfish habitat. It's proven that dredging works to do that, and that's the point of it, to remove the unsuitable materials. If additional dredging were proposed, is that something that the commission would consider as adverse or as habitat improvement by removing it and getting better habitat? I know it maybe sound like a simple question, but it's reality. It is improving.
Yeah,
Just a quick point. I've seen no evidence that to support what you just claimed about shellfish habitat improving in Allen's Harbor after dredging. So if you could bring any reports you have to the next hearing, I'd appreciate that.
Water quality improved. We'll pull together what we need to for supporting our claims in regard to shellfish habitat improvements and throughout the Cape and other areas of dredging of anoxic mud.
Yeah, and to your question, I'm generally reluctant to ask people for their opinions on a hypothetical, so I would suggest that you present the information, and we will take it under advisement when at the next presentation you make.
Thank you.
So with that, it sounds like the request is to reschedule the next hearing for the meeting of September 21st of this year. So can we have a motion to that effect?
Sure. I'll move that we continue the hearing on the notice of intent for 14 Mill Point Road, map 1, parcel J1, 6-94 to our meeting of September 21st, 2022.
A second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Good. Well, thank you, everyone, for your participation
Thank you.
tonight, and we look
Through the
forward to
chair.
seeing you again in September.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Next item on the agenda is a order of condition for the Harwich Conservation Trust Coldbrook Preserve, map 23, parcel C3-2, C1-10, and C1-1 for the proposed ecological restoration.
Amy, I have a question about this. There won't be any vote on what they're gonna do right now with,
What?
on the order conditions.
There's gonna be a vote on these orders of conditions. And actually, I'm sorry, I didn't print out myself a copy, so I need to go print one, or somebody needs to let me borrow theirs.
I don't have the whole thing printed out. Amy.
Oh, does anybody want it printed out while I'm printing mine out?
I'm okay, thanks, I got it here.
Okay.
While you're doing it, I'll have one, please.
Okay. Just give us 2 minutes. And, yeah. Not prepared.
See how there it is, there's the Shellfish Hazard Survey.
And you folks go to the Wacquasit event, that forum?
The All Cape Conference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was it?
The first day I was there, it was very good.
Yeah.
I thought, especially the one on the ponds and all.
With a standard way of sampling and data collection.
Yep.
And that's part of what that $2.5 million is gonna fund.
That could go a long way. That's good.
Okay. So, orders of conditions for the Coldbrook project. I've provided the draft to the Harwich Conservation Trust as well as Nick Nelson from Interflu. Nick and I did speak with them, or speak yesterday about it. And really had the one question that Michael Locke, who I know is online, did have was regarding the special condition number 12 about the plant survival rate. I stuck with the 90% survival rate after 3 years. That's standard for us. Mike made a good point of what if there are kind of circumstances such as this where we have a long-term drought, or a drought like we're having. And I said, My recommendation would still stand. However, if there are circumstances such as that, the commission would certainly be willing to talk with you and work with you if that need should arise, and adjust accordingly. So hopefully everyone's okay with that piece. In addition, well, I guess first, do any of the commissioners or people from the trust have any comments on the conditions that you have before you? Because a commissioner has provided me with additional potential conditions, which I would go over after.
I got some comments on number 15, whenever the time is right.
Go ahead.
Okay, so 15, I thought, as I described it, there would be a little more identification or focus on the pond inlets and outlets.
Okay,
And
go
so
ahead.
I wouldn't mind seeing that language inserted where, for example, it says these reports, let's see, the third sentence, these reports are to detail information on water flow through the system. Perhaps after that system and comma, you could add with a focus on the pond inlets and outlets.
Sure.
So that's a kind of a simple.
I do remember you saying that, yep.
Yep, between the comments. And then further down.
Hold on one second. Let me make sure I get it right. Okay, got it.
Maybe in that same sentence, we did talk about photographs of key locations, repeated photographs. So I think photographs of the inlets and outlets and perhaps any other important locations should be called out in number 15.
Okay.
You can insert that inclusion of photographs. That would be good with every report. And the last one, let's see. Oh yeah, further down, it says.
In the same number?
Yep, number 15, it says invasive plants growing back, comma, and any issues that occurred. To me, any issues is a little vague, and I know what I was trying to get at was really concerns about fish passage impediments. So I'd like to see, after invasive plants growing back, insert fish passage impediments, and if any, committee members want to identify what those issues might be, well, let's put them in. Otherwise, I think any issues on its own is a little vague.
I agree. I was just trying to be a little bit more all-encompassing.
Yeah.
So do you want to say something like, or plants growing back or other fish passage impediments?
I like insert right after invasive plants growing back, fish passage impediments.
I got it.
Comma, and then if there are other issues, put them in there, as opposed to, having the open-ended issues.
Your concern is the fish passage.
That
Remaining
was-
clear, though.
Yeah, that was kind of a big part of my interest in a detailed monitoring, is to make sure those inlets and outlets, the ponds, didn't have a post-construction problem.
Okay.
I had just two sort of clarification ones at the top of that page, under 13A.
Yep.
The next to last sentence, we talk about both spring upstream and fall downstream fish migrations.
Yep.
Add the word fish in there. And then under 15, the first sentence, again, it's just a nit, Amy, but the monitoring reports will be submitted 2 times annually during the first year the project is completed. And then June 30th and December 31st, and 1 time annual the following 2 years completed. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go back to the first sentence again. First year of the project is completed by June 30th and December 31st.
Got it.
Yeah, that's all. It's just a net.
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah, I just have some thoughts on number 15, the monitoring reports. First, I was very happy to see that being included within the order of conditions, because I think we need to keep track of this project as it goes along. What I'm wondering is whether or not those reports should be submitted to us probably quarterly during the construction and annually after the construction is completed, and also whether or not it would be helpful for a summary of those reports to be presented in person at a Conservation Commission meeting, especially the quarterly reports during the construction, just so that we are, very aware of what's happening, because, again, as what was pointed out during the discussions, This is going to be a very large project, it's going to be a very visible project, and therefore it may generate an awful lot of questions, certainly during the construction period and potentially thereafter. So that's just my thoughts.
I don't have an issue, I mean, with quarterly reports, and I do think kind of a public discussion, at least one or two of them, probably during the project, just where we're at is not a bad idea. So I'm curious how, Mike, how you feel about that.
Yes, hi everybody, Mike Locke, Director of Harwich Conservation Trust. Thanks for reviewing these order of conditions. I think that you know, as the project construction unfolds, I think quarterly reports sounds like too frequent in my view. Perhaps it could be modeled on the frequency of the first sentence that pertains to the monitoring reports post-construction. So a semi-annual status report, I think is what you're asking for during the construction phase, to be delivered by June 30 and by December 31 in the year in which construction begins, which presumably, well, we'll say the calendar year, the first full calendar year of construction, which would be presumably 2023 on our current timetable. I'm curious if Jim and fellow commission members would consider that as an option.
I mean, I would still prefer during the construction period, the quarterly reports, because I think that's where there's going to be a lot of public questions about the project, some of which may be coming to us directly. And the better we're informed, the better I think it's going to be for everybody. Once the project is completed, then I think annual reports would be sufficient.
Just a quick question for Mike. Mike, remind me the anticipated duration of the actual construction. I can't remember.
It should be beginning this winter.
Right.
It remains to be seen whether that's going to be within the end of the 2020 year or the start of 2023 calendar year. And then continue relative to the various aspects that can be completed with channel restoration, the microtopography, and then ultimately the visitor access enhancements should be completed by the fall of 2023.
9
That's
months.
That's
9
our
months to a year.
That's our hope.
Okay, so then if the entire construction project, you know, hopefully would be completed within a period of a year, that's only 4 reports. And then after the completion, then I think, you know, an annual report would be more than sufficient.
And a status report doesn't have to be that detailed.
Correct.
That was going to be my question,
Kind of
through the chair.
updates. And Stan has a question.
Yeah, I had a question. Mike, I just heard you say there's certain phases within there.
Mm-hmm.
What about if you did it rather on a time basis, each of those phases being complete? I'm just, as a possibility, I don't.
You may have an overlap.
Yeah. They're gonna be doing multiple things at multiple times.
But, well, I'm thinking like a completion.
I mean,
I understand.
Stan, I think it's better for a scheduling process and so that everybody knows when it's
I'm
coming.
just throwing that as a possibility.
Okay.
So I think there's the two separate things. The monitoring reports are a little bit more in-depth. That's actually you know, a report with all of these things, kind of a status update for the commission where you come in, or provide written, you know, documentation, something where the public can attend, and ask questions as they go along. I don't think that's, I think that's a good idea.
I think that's probably more what I'm thinking about, Amy.
Okay. Yeah.
So how do we want to word that in here?
So I'm gonna keep the monitoring reports kind of as it is, but, I'm gonna say, quarterly status reports on the project being given to the Conservation Commission during the duration of the project.
Beginning,
During the construction.
The construction phase of the project, yeah.
Yeah, and then at least yearly following the.
Yes, so all the other ones still would stay, yeah,
you want to say quarterly reports on the
quarterly status reports.
X date of the, every third month or something like that?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
We want to separate that to a different number, just because the number 15 monitoring reports are asking for.
I
what?
think it, yes, I think I will put it, cause I don't want people to get confused about what they are. So we'll make that a,
So that
another
will be number 18, Amy?
Yeah, number 18. Okay.
Good. Any other comments, changes?
Mark, oh, to mine, yeah, so if there's comments to what I've drafted, and I know Mark has a number, if you wanna go through them, fine, if you want me to go through them, fine.
Go right ahead.
Does anybody have any questions on my draft? Okay, so this afternoon, Mark wrote, these for me, and I'm gonna go through them, and I'll be happy to provide a copy tomorrow morning, to the trust if, or depending on which ones we approve or include. So actually, I like a lot of these. They kind of talk a lot about, you know, monitoring while the project is going on. So, Mark said would like to see these issues inserted for the orders of conditions for Colebrook. We'll go through them one at a time, and if you have comments, we can talk about it. Sound good? Wildlife scouting to take place 24 hours prior to beginning of any work, noticing dens, burrows, nests, and bedding areas. If you want to elaborate on your comments, feel free.
Just my thinking that was, it would be beneficial to know what is in the area before the work starts, to potentially be cautious of.
Right.
If there's gonna be an opportunity to move something or relocate something, take the opportunity to do it thoughtfully, rather than scaring everything to death and
Yeah,
chasing it down Bank Street.
yeah, with a grader.
Yeah, something bigger.
Would that be included in the new number 18 as a construction activity?
That's a new number.
Construction
I think a lot
monitoring.
of these would be just new numbers, if you're in agreement with them.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds
I
fine.
guess, how would it happen? Would it be a independent person? Would it be part of the team? You know, that's kind of important, you know.
I would envision a lot of, so HCT has a lot of very qualified volunteers. So wildlife scouting, that is really just somebody really taking the time to go out, comb the site to the best that they can, figure out what is where. They know the site, HCT knows the site better than anybody else. I don't think we need to have necessarily a expert in wildlife to be doing that. It's just, somebody should be looking, that's all.
Be aware. Just be
Yeah.
careful. Okay.
Wildlife spotters on site during and ahead of equipment working in any phase of the project. From what I've understood, there's gonna be people on the site kind of keeping an eye on things. The one thing I worry about is like having wildlife spotters who are not necessarily trained to be around big equipment. We don't want that hazard to be there. So that would have to be part of the project team in my mind, is to have somebody keeping an eye as machines are working. Which to my understanding, go ahead.
No, through the chair.
Please.
Mike and I haven't had a chance to discuss this. My kind of gut reaction is to say, that's the kind of care and caution that we would do as a matter of course.
Yes.
And you're right, we have volunteers out there all of the time. Technically, my question is, the national heritage requirements
Mhm.
are in fact cross-referenced in the conditions.
Yeah.
Beyond that, is it within the purview of the commission to require this as part of the regulation that you enforce? Is it part of the Wetlands Protection Act that you enforce that would require us to do this?
Wildlife habitat is in our
Is it?
purview.
All right.
If you're in a wetland, which you are here, wildlife habitat is one of the interests.
Okay.
I don't want to make it too onerous for you.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm no, and I'm not trying to be contentious. We want to do this. I'm trying to figure out a way to do it without imposing, in essence, micromanagement that makes it more complicated than it needs to be.
Mhm.
We all want to get to the same place.
Mhm.
So I'm just, and as I said, Mike and I haven't even had a chance to process the request and figure out how to do it, but to do it in a way that works.
The reason I suggested that, I'm an equipment operator by trade.
Right.
When you're doing your job, you don't necessarily have an opportunity to watch every piece of ground around you. If you have somebody in the region that can be a spotter, to look out for things, depending on what the circumstance is,
Right.
it could be beneficial.
Right.
Many construction sites, there's laborers around, there's always an opportunity to have a pair of eyes.
Right. And we probably can figure out a way to do that with our volunteer
Yeah, and
group.
I'm sure I would have some volunteers for you as well. And I mean, a lot of your volunteers are my volunteers too. But
Yes.
I think the point is just keeping an eye on things as a machine's moving around and making sure things aren't getting in the way. Natural heritage was really only specific to the turtles.
The turtles.
But one of the interests of like bordering vegetated wetlands like this is wildlife habitat and protection and wildlife. So, and then, so the next one, Mark, able-bodied and qualified personnel to relocate safely and unharmed any species encountered through the term of this project. I think that's would be very challenging. Just that, I mean, if you're talking about any species, technically that could mean a frog or fish or something like that.
Kind
But
of falls under the window of the same person.
I was gonna
Obviously,
say
there's
a
gotta be some
wildlife.
discretion.
right, so I think that kind of falls to the wildlife spotter, and
You want to say we're practical?
yeah, something like that. I mean, they have to do that for the turtles,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah.
Say qualified person, I think you might wanna strike that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think,
You don't wanna get into a pike and plover situation where you
No.
hire certain people.
no, we don't want you to have to hire like Audubon for something necessarily.
Maybe I should have said a person with the ability.
Yeah, we can change those wordings a little
In
bit.
reality, you know, when you're digging up some of the channels, I can picture coming across a semi-hibernating snapping turtle.
Snapping turtle, exactly.
And so have the bucket or an individual move it 50 yards over.
Right.
That's kind of what comes to mind.
Yep.
So whatever can be done easily
Yep.
without additional costs.
Next is all equipment being used on this project shall be free of oil or fuel leaks, any accidental fuel or oil spillage to be immediately contained, and soil removed from site and properly disposed of. I would just add to that and reported to the Conservation Commission. And obviously, we hope this doesn't happen, but accidents do happen. Anything above a 10-gallon spill is a bigger regulatory issue. So, and I should probably, like storage, I was gonna say, do we wanna, I don't know if Mike can answer this or not, but storage, like nighttime storage of this equipment, is it going to be kind of at 203 Bank Street in the parking area, or are machines potentially gonna be stored like in the wetland? Other places that I've worked for other things, we typically require overnight storage of vehicles not to be in a wetland. But
I would expect that they're gonna move up to dry ground.
yeah, that's kind of common sense, but I don't know.
I'm just thinking of what I've seen at the projects that I've
Yeah.
been to, and I think people move the equipment to dry ground.
Yeah. But I do think that's a good thing to put in, about the fuel leaks and storage. Care to be given to locate and remove any abandoned apparatus or matter left behind from cranberry operation or other activities on the property. So I think, like a lot of, that would be part of site cleanup, but I could include that into the site, keeping the site clean and whatnot in the orders there.
I mean, I don't anticipate that being anything of any consequence, but just as a matter of conversation, to be aware of what was there in the past, and if something is found, move it properly.
We know that culverts are gonna be gone, are leaving.
And we've owned the property for a long time, and Lord knows we've found a lot of things
I'm sure.
and disposed of them, and we're pretty clear about what's there, but we're perfectly happy to, that's fine.
We have to put these things in, so like, we know HCT and people you hire are gonna do a good job, but we have to pretend that you're just any applicant.
Still plenty of hockey pucks, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of golf balls too.
Of course.
Hadn't thought of that.
Hockey pucks as well.
That's back when bogs could freeze.
I know.
If it's not said, it's not clear, right?
Right, that's true. This one I think is great, so I think they're all good, but provisions for safety barriers and signage, basically signage and barriers to prevent people and pets who are not directly involved in the project from traveling freely around the site. We didn't really talk about it at the meeting about how you're gonna keep people off that site, but certainly signage, and you can work with, I'm happy to talk with you about what type of barriers. And then Mark said in special.
Amy.
Yeah.
This is Nick. This is Nick Nelson.
Hi, Nick.
I'm just
Sorry to
wondering if
bother
I
you.
can speak to that
I
point.
didn't think he was gonna be able to join us.
Yeah, sorry, just joined in recently, but wanted to just mention that access point.
Yeah.
I think the contractors typically try to put up, barriers or fencing in commonly accessed areas. But I will say that even in the most stringent places where they've put so many fences up, these sites are so big that people continue to get in. And it's really hard to keep everybody out. So it's a really important point and a really important component of construction from a safety perspective, because we've had, contractors going around their access roads and come around a corner and there's, a person walking their dog with their grandkid there. And so it's a really important point, and will be part of the contracting language. So just making the point that as much as we can do to keep people out, they're still going to be there. But it will be a point where the contractor and all the partners will be vigilant during construction.
No, understood. I didn't think you'd be able to fence off the entire thing by any means. But just for your own protection as well, just to have, where appropriate, at the most public access point, barriers and signage, so it decreases your liability. So that I should have thought of that to put in the conditions to begin with, and I didn't, so I'm glad Mark did. And then you say, at the end of special condition number 1, any work completed, it should read, any work being started. Hold on. Yes, that's true, it should say. And then an as-built plan required on the entire site. Nick and I actually had a conversation about this the other day. And number 17, for projects like this, instead of as-built, they're as-constructed plans right now.
I noticed that after I wrote it.
Okay. So those are the additional potential conditions. And I think we can work with the trust to make sure, to get them accomplished, especially the ones that were a little bit more heavy on some of the monitoring. Okay?
Good, thank you. Any other comments?
Just a quick question for Amy. Is the fueling within the buffer zone, is that a general, or is that case by case?
Allowing fueling?
Yeah. Is that a general condition, or is that a boilerplate one, or is that?
Well, the one that Mark said about, refueling should be kind of in a staging area.
Yeah. I get that for some of my projects, you know, on my own, is, well, it's kind of almost a general condition that
Yep.
you cannot fuel in a buffer zone.
Well, usually you wouldn't, just for accessibility as a rule, but.
Yeah.
Nick, you've seen a number of these projects. Do they typically refuel in the staging area, or is there any like right on, you know, in the middle of it refueling?
Yeah, I think on this site, you know, if they're having a fuel truck come to fuel the vehicles, I think it's going to be pretty tough for that fuel truck to go anywhere except for that parking area right at Bank Street, or on the road close to Cedar Swamp Bog.
Got it.
You know, sometimes they carry fuel tanks in like their own trucks,
Right.
And in a small dump truck that then gets them to more of the remote areas, because it can take an excavator like an hour to travel on those dirt roads from one end to the other.
Right.
So sometimes they will use that for sort of a short-term fuel up. But that's always done outside of the wetland. It may be just on the dirt road or in one of the other staging areas when they do that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll add that. Anything else? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I failed at the very beginning to properly introduce myself for the record as president of the trust. And I was going to go on to say that you were dealing with me as the sole representative, but thankfully Michael Locke was going to be on the call virtually, which Michael has been. And Nick, I'm delighted that you were able to join us. I didn't know that you were going to be able to come. But we're glad that Nick was able to provide some information around other projects to help with the order of conditions. This all makes sense because we want to get it right. I do have a general question raised by another trustee reader of the order of conditions around number 10, general condition.
General, okay.
Any refuse material from the site, we just want to be clear that you understand that as part of the plan that Nick and his team have developed, sand will remain on the site. And this reader observed that in some construction projects, sand is considered refuse. This is agricultural sand that will be kept on the site.
Yep.
Nick, you may want to comment on that further, but we just wanted that to be clarified at the beginning.
I understand. I wouldn't consider, personally for this project, I wouldn't consider what you're using as refuse. But we can clarify that if there's a question. We know that you're not taking it off-site.
All right, then it's fine. Nick, did that make sense to ask?
Yep, no, that's fine. I think it hasn't come up on other projects. I think we sort of all assume that it's the other items deemed refuse, not sand.
Okay.
But it's a good point of clarification.
It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Other comments? Good. Can we have a motion to
Close the hearing and issue the order of conditions.
close the hearing and issue, well, we want to approve the order of conditions.
Approve the order of conditions.
Yeah, with the amendments and changes.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we close the hearing and approve the order of conditions as presented to us, and including the amendments to those order of conditions that were discussed at tonight's meeting. This is all for the Colebrook Preserve, map 23, parcel C3-2, C1-0, and C1-1.
Thank you, Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
very
to our
much.
meetings, the project gets better.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We should have these out in a few days.
Sounds
Okay?
good. Yeah, thank you very much.
Who's the second on that? Mark?
Yeah, Mark.
I'm gonna go get our cohorts.
Thank you, good night.
Everywhere with salt marsh impact study, which allowed her to say there was no adverse impact on salt marsh in the dark these years. That study did nothing to come close to that conclusion. It was a qualitative status of opinion. It's say things. You know,
All right, it's done here.
it's hard. I know. It's we have our hand. Some folks hear that and say, that's the way it is. It's not the way it is. Right?
Okay.
Welcome back.
Good to be back, it's freezing in there.
You do need oh, it's even colder over there.
Not dressing right. Not dressing for the season.
You have some issues with the HVAC in this building.
Impact in there. This is a benefit.
Yeah, good.
You could have sat in my office, you would have roasted. Do you want to go on to the next?
Yes, the next item is discussion and possible vote on 2 Harvest Hollow for an unpermitted fence. Amy?
Yeah, so we're not gonna, I'm recommending we put this off till September 7th. I mean, on the surface, I agree with Hamlin Consulting's opinion on the coastal bank issue, but I still haven't heard from DEP yet. I tried again Monday, because I knew that they were going to be on vacation, my contact there. Still haven't heard back from them. I'd like to give them one other shot. Not so much, it has implications for this project as well as potentially for various other projects going forward. And the applicant of 2 Harvest Hollow understands that. So I think we give DEP until next meeting and hopefully can discuss this. I'll keep trying. If I don't hear from that person, I have a couple others.
Okay.
So, I just wanna, for this person and for future, just make sure we get it right.
All right, so we don't need to take any action
Nope.
on that at all tonight. Next item, update on conversation with council regarding 374 Main Street property.
Yep, so, more forthcoming on this, but I did meet with administration and council yesterday about this regarding options and how to proceed, either with an IMA or with whatever we wanted to do with the property. Release it, anything, because the language in the self-help funds is very kind of specific about how things can be used. And so administration is going to speak with the selectmen to hopefully arrange a joint meeting with you about this, so ASAP. And I also mentioned we also need at that meeting to talk about the current lease. So.
Okay.
Can't really talk too much. They want to have a joint meeting where we all sit down and talk together rather than, and hopefully that's what we do, because we all need to sit around at a table together instead of me talking to you, selectmen speaking separately. I think it's the best if we talk together.
Yeah.
Okay?
Good.
And have council present.
Okay, we have 2 sets of minutes, I believe, to review and approve.
And if you need a few minutes, let me know. One of these sets of minutes is pertinent to our executive session that we're gonna have shortly.
Okay.
But if you're ready, you can, if you have any edits, you can let me know.
I went through them, I have no comments other than what happened to those marathon sessions, Ernie. You know, you
I
came on
know.
this chair and you just.
They all
all
just
these-
sort of disappeared, didn't they?
Just, what,
I remember this was one of our 11 o'clock
Oh,
nights
yeah,
or something. I
seven
think.
big hearings, it was like, wow, these are the ones.
It'll happen again, don't
Oh,
worry.
yeah,
Oh,
those are tough.
no. Be careful what you say. Or wish
It's
for.
not an if, it's a when.
Yeah.
I had one comment under the, for the December 18th one.
Yeah.
Under the Beth Windmill
What page?
first.
Come into those meetings.
1, 2, 3, oh, I don't know if this is the same number. Well, no, it'd be on this one is on the second page, where it talks about the stairs going down the bank in the first paragraph.
This is on December 18th.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's a
Yep.
comment in here that it states, Ms. Ciesowski added, Ms. Winville had submitted copies of proposed planning plan, gave more detail on the steps that had been constructed. She stated that requiring the stairs to instead meet the 18-inch above-ground requirement. I took out the word instead.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But other than that, they look fine, Amy. It
Okay.
looks pretty clear. Anybody need more time to go through these? All right, let me make a motion to approve the minutes for December 18th, 2019 meeting with one minor change. We have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
I abstained, 'cause I wasn't on the board.
Yeah, and I abstain also.
Okay. You technically, if we had a quorum issue, you could vote just to get them legalized, but we don't have a quorum issue for it.
Yeah, I wasn't even at that meeting, but, I mean, it's.
Yeah, it's okay. So now, before we go into executive session, which we can do the minutes of executive session there too, but before we go into executive session, do we have does anybody want to bring something up? I will say, I have one thing.
Well, let me ask, okay, all right, I'm sorry.
Before we go
Yeah,
into,
ahead.
yeah, this is,
Yeah.
before we go into executive session, not yet, Caleb. I did have a conversation, or back and forth emails with the animal control officer, regarding concerns at Thompson's Field and wanting to have discussion. She's gonna find out what she can pull together from her lieutenant to provide you, and she would like to come to a future meeting to talk about how we can do things a little better out there potentially. I would like you folks to meet with her prior to us having all of our meetings are public anyways, but having a big public meeting dedicated specifically to that, if we're gonna do it, I think it just needs to kind of be a discussion item first. Okay? And trying to think, go ahead.
Let me describe the request to have a harvest plan for herring at the reservoir. Is that worth it?
I would love to hear more about that.
The Board of Selectmen has asked me to come in on Monday to talk about it. I wasn't sure where it falls. It's obviously property managed
Yes.
through the Conservation Commission. The Department of Natural Resources asked for my help, and this is wearing my State Division of Fisheries hat, to develop a harvest plan for river herring. And so I did that. It was presented to the Board of Selectmen. They've asked me to come in on Monday to give a brief presentation at their regular meeting. And so that's coming up. And so, just so you folks know, that's something that's going on. I don't know, it's an activity that, I don't know if we regulate it by the Conservation Commission. I don't think so. But it's still
It's
property.
fishing, really.
It's fishing,
But it's people,
it's really the Board of the state law says the Board of Selectmen
Yeah.
must approve these plans, and then it kicks back to my agency, then it goes on to a federal agency. But I still think it's good for you folks to know, because it would be an activity that would connect to our discussions
Our
in the
land.
past about gates and night closures and all
Definitely.
that. So,
Well, if anybody can listen in or attend remotely on Monday, is this coming?
this coming Monday, 22nd, I
Yeah.
think it's a 7:30 meeting. I don't know where in the agenda it is. I think they probably want 15 minutes and move on to the next item.
They'll post an agenda by end of day tomorrow.
Yeah.
If it's a Monday.
And I did send you a copy of the plan and to
Yep.
Heinz. It's technically coming from Heinz's office as a request to our agency. And,
Can I give it to the members?
yeah, it's a draft. It's a public document. Anybody can look at it. I think down the road, for better or for worse, we will have to manage that activity.
Right.
You know,
What activity are we talking about?
harvesting herring.
Oh,
It's been
Or at least
closed-
the access, to
It's
it.
been closed since 2006.
Right.
And so if the Board of Selectmen like it, then it would move on to other levels of approval. But eventually, I think it would be, the harvest would be managed by the Natural Resource Department. But we would still have to consider things like the gate and openings, and we'd probably want to weigh in. My proposal says, I think 3 days a week there would be harvest managed by the Department of Natural Resources. Other days, no harvest. And so we might want to weigh in on those days.
Yeah.
You know, so just so you folks know, it's not a done deal. We don't know how the Board of Selectmen will feel about it, but it did come through Heinz's office. That was
Okay.
what it was.
I'll send that off.
can I bring up something about the Heron River? Has anybody driven down Great Western Road and looked to the north on the Heron River and see the invasive species that is just taking it over?
Can't see water.
Can't see any water or nothing. I think, I don't know what we need to do something as a board. And I don't know how the funding mechanism goes or how we would go about this. You have a management plan, but have we talked about dredging or doing anything on that river? When is the time that we can sit down and really start focusing? I brought it up a couple meetings ago, last meeting, about having plans on managing the properties and the lands so that we can apply for article money, CPC money or
Yep.
something, so that we can do these tasks. That's in bad shape.
So I think prior to deciding what we want to do, we need to better study the issue, and have, I mean, it would be, scientists coming out to look at the issue, and see and make recommendations rather than not, because it needs, in order to get money for something, you need to prove, what the issue is and what are the different alternative means of dealing with it, so we can all make better decisions. So, I mean, right now, we're looking at the lower part of the Herring River, potentially, but we do have wetlands funds, but that wetlands funds has already been talked about to be used for that part of the Herring River study. I don't know if CPC funds could potentially be used for a study of impediment on the
Freshwater part.
upper, up north of West Reservoir. We have an October 3rd deadline for getting CPC applications in, if you were considering something like that. I mean, it is a community resource, it is natural resources, and I think could fit in.
Yeah.
John would know better.
You go down to the rail trail and look at the river from there, from that
Yeah.
perspective, it's pretty stagnant. I mean, you can see the water, but it's not moving at all.
You know
So
what's
a lot
ironic?
of that, I think, maybe the culverts under both the rail trail and Great Western Road.
There's a couple
which
issues there.
Amy has the Great Western one anyhow on a list of potential replacement at some point.
Yeah, we put in for a grant recently for the Long Pond one, and then talked about the Great Western / bike trail culverts, and unfortunately, one grant didn't get funded, but we're looking at others, because flow is certainly an issue, in addition to the invasive vegetation, from what I can understand. Brad?
Well, just ironic, the species you're talking about is not invasive, it's the native swamp
Right.
loosestrife.
It's aggressive.
Which we're protecting in Cold Brook.
Right.
It's associated with a moth, I never knew that. But it's really aggressive at rooting into channels, and it can just change flows. So, but you have to manage it. And do you recall years ago, they used to dredge that with a bog owner's hydro dredge that he made?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Putting an engine on a barge, and they used to just do it. Now, you would have to get a lot of permitting to do that.
Yeah.
But I think a restoration notice of intent would allow that, so I think that's something to look at. The second thing is, there's a new DEP policy for stream maintenance when it's a fish run, and I helped draft that policy with DEP. I can send you a copy, Amy.
That'd be great.
It makes it pretty easy now to get approval to do this without a notice of intent. You don't need really anything but check off with DMF and the Concom if you're not using machines, if it's handwork.
What time of the year would be the best time to do that?
You'd have to avoid the juvenile herring immigration.
Yeah, I would think winter would actually probably be the best.
We like late fall.
Yeah.
Late fall's good,
Up until
summer's horrible.
February or something? How long, like how many months is that allowed for that?
There's a
before
couple
they say-
windows. I should send you those plans, it has all that spelled out in it, and I
Send it
draft-
to me, I'll disseminate.
Yeah, and I draft plans for all the towns, it's part of what I do for my job, and
Yeah.
I try to make it easy. When it changes is when you need machines, then you need a notice of intent.
Yeah.
And, the old days of the bog owners getting in there and cleaning things out with a Chevy engine on a barge, I think it's kind of over.
Well, we gotta do something though, it doesn't, I don't know, it must impede the flow of everything, just the water, the
It'll
stagnant.
alter the channel, it'll turn it into an emergent wetland. It's one of my concerns I have with Cold Brook is to that earlier design, is that if you let this plant do that, it
Yeah.
will. And so you've gotta find ways to keep it open. And this policy is pretty powerful. I think it says, okay, it's one of the interests of the Wetlands Protection Act to allow these sea-run fish to come up. So the policy took years to develop, but they're basically DEP saying, let's make it easy to do this work. The hard part is when you wanna use machines. But, you know,
So,
maybe
go
you
ahead.
study, you know, doing a machine project with a restoration NOI.
Who does that land belong to, and how is it acquired? Is that town land?
The river itself
Well,
is, believe it or not, still considered, I think, navigable waters, Commonwealth waters.
how about the surrounding land? So,
It's a mix of private and town, so if you stay in the channel, then you're in the Commonwealth waters. Depending on where you are, it's a mix of private and public.
which
I-
means it was never acquired by anyone, it just
Right.
belongs to the common.
Right. So you're aware after,
Well, are you speaking about the, not to interrupt you, but are you speaking about the river going up, but past north of the West Reservoir?
Uh-huh.
That was all
Area-
privately owned. There was a lot of different bogs along the river.
Not the river, though.
Yes, it was.
No,
Between Great Western Road and Main Street, my grandfather owned a wet river
Well,
bog.
if you go back,
And the water rights were controlled by those bogs. And that's why that river, that's why the West Reservoir was built,
right,
for the cranberry bogs.
if you go back far enough, you're right.
but if you're doing it for fish passage in the channel, then there's a lot of,
For the last 80 years or so, it's been, you know, if it's a great pond, the waters flowing from it are Commonwealth waters.
so, just to tailing off of that, Brad, Ernie, myself, and, people more expert than me met about the Herring River study. We'll get into that in a minute, but as a result of that, I started thinking about the upper reaches as well. And I thought about the Colebrook project, and I thought about the resource that we have that we're now aware of, and they might be the person who bids on doing a study. But I asked Nick Nelson if, either for the lower part of the Herring River study or for upper parts of the Herring River, if he would be willing to make suggestions or comments as to what a study would entail, what to look for, and he said he would be happy to do that.
Wonderful.
They would ultimately be ones to, if they were interested in bidding on the project, but I said, you know, he's a fluvial geomorphologist, he studies the movement of streams, and he's a wetland scientist and stuff like that, and so somebody like that, I mean, he could, and there's no issue there, he could informally make suggestions and what we should look for and things like that, and he said he'd be happy to help us.
Okay, great. Mark, did you have a comment?
Just a couple of weeks ago, didn't we discuss an RFP for the entire river study? Because in that conversation, I'd
That's what
asked if
we're-
we were talking about going all the way up, all the way back up to Long Pond. So, I mean, it sounds to me like we had already decided we were gonna put this in motion.
So what we had discussed was really, was to do pretty much from the reservoir south, actually, or from almost 28 south, because really looking at potential impacts of water-dependent structures on salt marsh, shellfish, wetland resource areas. And I think the two systems are it's all one river, but it's very different because you have a salt ecosystem and then you have a very different freshwater ecosystem part of the river. So I would think that while they're the same river, that they would be two separate things.
I love what you're suggesting,
But
Mark.
yeah.
I think it's overdue, but I do think what we voted on was really specific to water-dependent structures. And so we would have to, you know, work on another, you know, approach.
Just a further comment is that these problems aren't specific to Harwich, they're
Mhm.
not specific to the Herring River. They're Cape-wide problems with freshwater resources,
Mhm.
and as I've said a couple of times, the Cape Cod Commission is putting together what it calls a freshwater initiative.
Mhm.
I don't know if problems like the one you're talking about on the Herring River is on any of those people's radar at this point, I think it would be a great idea, you know, if you wanna get involved in just, they're meeting on a regular basis. And it is talk more than anything else right now, but still, it's important for people to be aware and for these kinds of issues to be in the purview of what's being considered here, because flow in the Herring River has, I'm sure, a big impact on the water quality in the West Reservoir, for example. And if the flow upstream is getting blocked, so there isn't enough fresh water coming in, I don't know, but I would imagine it might have something to do with the problems this summer. But you might get informed on the freshwater initiative and the ponds network that I can forward you some emails about that. Might look into it and follow the links. Get on the mailing list.
Well, yeah, I just wanna be able to contribute and do something, get something going for the town.
Yeah.
Cause I know that's a big, part of the town is the Herring River. It's just,
I think
it's been neglected.
Heinz will be a key person to get involved and keep involved in this as well as the herring warden and the natural resources director. So certainly have Heinz kind of, you know, say what he does where in the river. Currently, he has a knowledge of the river as well, so have Heinz be part of this.
Is that more under his purview than ours?
Well, we're the regulatory body in terms of whatever you do there, dredge it, whatever activity we're gonna have to permit. He is the natural resource director and herring warden, so he has a big stake in it as well. I say it's a combination.
If I could add, what I've seen a lot through my job is watershed plans, and you'll see someone tackle watershed plans, and they often come out of either Conservation Department, Commission, or Natural Resource Department.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll have a non-governmental group do it, lead it, but those are kind of where these things come from. And I think that's what you're talking about, a whole watershed plan for the Herring River.
Yeah.
And I love that, but I don't want to dilute our need to get better guidance for water-dependent structures. So it's almost, you know, one step and then a second step.
Yeah. You can talk about it further.
You can connect them. A good watershed plan is going to cost some money, I think.
Pretty important, because you got one half that's seeming to hold its own, and the other half is dying on the vines. So.
Yeah. Here's one that was done. It's called a Diagnostic Study for the Preservation and Management of the Herring River, Harwich, Massachusetts. 1997 report by a guy named Tunison. I got a copy. It's 190 pages. I don't know how it evolved, but to me, you know, a follow-up on that was kind of like a literature review on all the things, and that would be a great way to build a watershed study, is grabbing Tunison's work.
Okay.
Can you send me a link to that, Brett?
Yeah. You know what?
Yeah,
What
send it to all of us.
what I recommend is getting that draft harvest plan out, because there's a lot of citations in that plan that I dug up, including that one. And so, I can do it unless you want to do it, Amy. I'm out in the field tomorrow, so.
I can send them the harvest plan. I would just
Yeah.
suggest that whatever you want to send to the group, that you send to me and I'll do it.
Yeah, I'll send you the DP policy, but if you want to send the harvest plan, the references really cover what I found for the Herring River. And so even though it's for herring harvest, there's a lot there for what has been done, and so it's a nice little building block for our study, and
Yeah.
so take a look at that. Yeah, general ecological reconnaissance and evaluation of proposed improvements to the Herring River, Harwich, Godfrey, 1974.
Okay.
There's a couple things out there like that could be building blocks to a new watershed plan.
Yep.
Yeah,
It'd
only
be- it'd
50
be
years
a
old.
great achievement by teaming up with Amy's department, Heinz's department, and moving that forward.
Yeah.
Yep, I'd
That'd
love
be
to.
great.
That's the kind of stuff we like to do.
That's why I'm hanging on, yeah, for that type of thing.
I don't think I have anything else before we go into executive session.
Pain, the history of Harwich, 1937.
So
Anybody else have
before we-
anything else? 'Cause you-
No.
you'll need to motion and second to move out of regular session into executive session, not to return, and then roll call. And then Caleb, if you would just give us a thumbs up when we know that we're okay to start talking in executive session.
Okay, can we have a motion?
Yeah, I'll move that we adjourn the regular session of this meeting and enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing pending litigation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Roll call.
Roll call, please. Wayne?
Yeah,
Al?
Aye.
Aye. Ernie Crafty?
Aye.
Chase?
Yes, Stan has to as well.
Okay, we are now in executive session.
Hang on 1 minute.
First,
Wait a minute.
Yep, I know.
Until we're on.